From your point of view, what would you say do you feel that the main thing religion, and I'm not speaking about in particular traditions at this point, but religion as a whole needs to grapple with, and what's the main challenge it faces as it tries to kind of meet the challenge of the 21st century?
Yeah, I think that, it's very clear that the old secularization thesis, which said that religion will die, is of course, been discredited right in our time. We're seeing religion coming back in a very forceful kind of way. I would say that it's not religion coming back, it's always been there. Sometimes we use paradigms and perspectives from Western Europe or North America and think that the whole world is exactly the same. In the third world, religion has always been a very vital factor of human existence and human life. Again, if you ask the question, can religion rise to the challenge? Indeed it will, but it will do so in its own way. It's already doing so. So I think the challenge is for us is how to correctly frame questions in a way which does not privilege secular modernity or the 21st century. We should all be just very humble and say that, look, religion has many problems. It has contributed towards conflict and so on, but so too has secular modernity and the post-enlightenment. It's not been the panacea to all of our problems, and so we come together as people of religion, people of no faith, people of different worldviews and ideologies, all with our frailties and our weaknesses, and join hands together in saying, what can we contribute in a modest way towards building a better world, a more peaceful, just and sustainable world in which all of us can coexist meaningfully.
Okay. If you look 20 years down the line, what would you feel is going to be this element that's going to be very different about the way the religions will be at that in the future? Is there anything particular that stands out in your mind?
Yes, I do think that one of the critical challenges that is facing us all is what is an appropriate place for religion within public life. And this is a very, it's a critical challenge. It's much contested in much of Muslim societies. There is a kind of idea that religion should supersede everything else. It should be hegemonic. It should superimpose itself upon the state. Sometimes it's called a theocratic model. Yes. I think that's not very helpful. I would, advise my Muslim co-religionists that that's a kind of idolatry of the state. That we do not worship the state. If you have an Islamic state,
part of the essence of secularism,
right, it's not going to be the panacea of all of the problems. Now, that's the one view. The other view, which comes from Western Christianity in particular, is that of the strict separation of religion and state. Right. What is called in the United States disestablishment, or now in France it's called laicism, secularism, and marginalizing religion to the private sphere. I think that for me, religion is not going to be taken out of the public arena. We are not schizophrenic. Yeah. I am a Muslim in the mosque, I am a Muslim in the university, I am the Muslim in the public life. These are the values that shapes my worldview. And I can't take off my shoes at the school and then suddenly become someone else. It's not wholesome. So I think we need to find then an appropriate role for religion in the public life. And for me, it should be that religion not superimpose itself upon the state, but play an active role as part of a broader civil society, in being the moral conscience of the society. The insurance for a true democracy is how strong the civil and how independent and critical the civil society is to balance the power of the state.
Right.
And so, for example, in the United States, currently we have this awful war in Iraq. I was very inspired by the way in which a number of religious leaders and institutions emphatically and categorically said this is an unjust, illegal and immoral war. But they were unable, because of that model of separation, to give effect to it on the ground. What does it mean on the ground? It means that you tell a committed young person who's either Catholic or Protestant and say to him that you cannot go in this war and kill in the name of an illegal, immoral and unjust war. You have to go for conscientious objection. But why have religious leaders stopped short? Because they have felt this is not our place. But then this is a subtle kind of insidious religious legitimation, because you're stopping short. Yeah.
Well, I feel this is a very interesting point that you brought up, because I agree that neither the theocratic model nor the separation of church and state, one of which comes from one worldview, one of which comes from another, is what we need. And I feel it's interesting to hear that you speak to your Muslim friends about trying to break down the idea that theocracy is the way to go, and I feel the same way in the United States. I'm trying to break down the barrier that religion should stay out of politics, because to me that's like saying morality, and morality and ethics at a fundamental level should stay out of politics. And I can't make. I feel it's important, but I also feel because a lot of the protesters and a lot of the peace movement in the United States does not adopt a more complex picture of the issue of war and the issue of religious violence, that they kind of remove themselves from the political realm because they adopt a purely pacifistic position, which to me is not the message ultimately of religion, or the message, or it's not, and it doesn't deal with the morally ambiguous world that we need to involve themselves with, but because they kind of adopt a reactionary kind of pacifistic position, not that, it just in general. Then they kind of remove themselves from the political debate, and then I feel like, just like you're saying, that we have to re-inject ourselves and say, no, this war is unjust for these particular reasons, but also at that time engage in we can't take some kind of pure position of pacifism. We have to engage in the morally complex situations of violence and of governing. So I feel like I feel like in the West, too often you see a lot of the progressive elements of the society too willing to be marginalized.
Whereas you have the idolatry of the Islamic State in the Muslim world, you have the idolatry of nationalism and patriotism in the Western model. Right. Because you see, you have people are kind of ambivalent. They would say on the one hand that this war is wrong and fight against it. Yeah. But I'm praying for the soldiers. How can you pray for? You have to tell the soldiers you cannot go there. I see. My theology, was developed in the struggle against apartheid. So I see things much more clearer. There we had a situation in which
there the issue of violence
young people were conscripted, white young people conscripted into the South African Defence Force to defend an immoral system, a crime against apartheid, right? And so what can you do? I mean, you cannot say you have to say to young people that you cannot go. Your Christian witness then is to say that, even if you're going to imprison me,
I agree.
I cannot fight in this war. And this unequivocal message did not come through from the Christian church. And I think it's not because they are ill-intentioned, because they are trapped within a theology of what is called church theology. You have three kinds of theologies, as we say in South Africa. You have state theology, which is the theocratic model. You have church theology, which when you see injustices and in the society, you say, no, I cannot say anything about this because I'm going to be political, as Tutu was called a politician when he criticized apartheid. Or you have a third model, which is prophetic theology, which is speaking truth to power, counterbalancing, because we cannot get away from dealing with power.
that's the issue. We need to embrace that. Exactly.
Yeah, you cannot.
I feel that we can't remove ourselves from
We
the
are
world
human
of power.
beings. We have the frail. We are not angels.
Yes.
And so we deal with sin. We deal with power.
Yes.
But we need to find a way of not deluding ourselves. Oh, it's others who, want to fuse religion and power.
Yes.
I am not involved with power because I'm in the private sphere.
Yes.
You're dealing with power.
Yes.
You're legitimating power, but in a more insidious way because you're not being honest.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think people use the excuse also that religion has so often been a negative force in state politics, or what they perceive that, to remove themselves from actually dealing with
and
that
I think
issue.
that's also a complex that we have. Yes, religion has been a force for evil, but so too has many other ideologies like socialism and communism a few years ago.
And about every other kind of state.
We are all just,
sure.
that's what I'm saying. We all need just to be humble and to say that, look, I can contribute my few cents and you come but the key thing is that we need to work together and not have arrogance that I have more than what you have.
Right.
It's a common human project.
Right.
And we are frail and we are not angels and we will err and we'll stumble.
Right.
But we will pick each other up and show compassion.
Right.
And that, I think, is the way towards a peaceful, just and sustainable world.
Good. I wanted to ask you a few questions about interreligious dialogue and people being rooted in the tradition, because I think it's an interesting question here. Because in our work on the magazine, one of the things we begin to notice after a while in the interfaith, in the interreligious, because we were interviewing people from all different faiths, and often mystics in their own faiths, and people who were deeply rooted in their own traditions in different ways. But one of the things you begin to notice, and it's completely a generalization, so it's not necessarily true, but it was true enough to make you think about it, which is that sometimes the people who are very deeply rooted in their own traditions, in the depth, and were really speaking with the spiritual depth that you knew was coming out of a deep appreciation and deep understanding of their own tradition, and a real spiritual weight. Often were also holding on to a regressive political and social context in that tradition. They were exclusivists sometimes, or they could be very kind of antiquated whereas sometimes the more liberal ecumenical elements of the traditions were much more, you appreciated their political and social openness, their ecumenical element, but they often seem to have lacked the depth of real spiritual weight within the context of the tradition. They often didn't have that. And so it was this kind of weird, you appreciated on the one hand the depth, the personal, spiritual, real passion and you appreciated that. On the other hand, but you appreciated the social and political openness of some, but we have to be able to fuse those in some ways. And so I wanted to ask you about that dilemma. I think that is a problem within a religious dialogue.
I think you've put your finger on one of the major challenges facing interreligious dialogue and interreligious activists. I think this is the most important issue and what I call leverage for social transformation, for religious transformation. If you're not rooted in your tradition, if you're not authentic, and you're just a free agent, moving about and not taking care of what are the key issues in my tradition and trying to be as faithful as you can towards it, you're not going to resonate with ordinary believers.
Yeah, right.
So I think that this is one of the major challenges. What could happen is as well, you begin in the interreligious dialogue, and in the encounter itself, you get transformed, right? So you move ahead, and your congregation or others remain behind. So you can move, and so often in the interreligious dialogue we say, I feel closer to you as a Christian than to my own. And I think it's beginning to be realized, and so increasingly people are speaking of intra-religious dialogue between Muslims themselves, dialogue between Christians themselves, and that's the tough one. And I think that's the measure. That's the measure of tolerance. It's to what extent can you tolerate, right, people within your own tradition who interpret the tradition in ways which you find quite offensive. I mean, that's the litmus test of true tolerance.
Now, yeah, should we, maybe just to start, should we tolerate that? I don't mean that, I know that sounds bad, but what does toleration mean in those? Because
it should mean we tolerate them, we tolerate their right to express themselves, but we disagree with their interpretations. You know, this is very important, you see, because often we make the idea or the interpretation the issue and forget that this is a human being, right? He's created, as Christians would say, in the image of God.
Because I don't consider myself a Christian, but I come from a Christian background. So let's take that. So the Jerry Falwell, the Pat Robertsons of the world, you know, I don't agree with them. I don't subscribe to them. I understand they have a right to say what they say, but at the times, but on the more extreme things of what they're saying, I feel it's it's an incredibly negative thing, and I don't feel very tolerant. I don't feel like obviously I'm not going out there to suppress them violently, but I don't feel very I don't feel very tolerant of them. I feel like I'd much rather they weren't an expression of my religious tradition.
But how are you going to deal with them?
Yeah,
exactly. You know, we're never going to find a world in which such interpretation and such people don't exist.
Yes, right.
We're never going to find a world like that. So they're always going to be with us. So then the challenge is, how do we relate to them? Right? And you've got a number of options. The one is, ban them, banish them, excommunicate them. Right? Is that what the interreligious movement?
Is it going to support that?
Yeah, you see, that's where the crunch comes. I mean, this wonderful idea of peace and tolerance, and so now you put in the spot.
Exactly, that's where it becomes an issue. What does tolerance mean?
As they say, the rubber hits the road. What are you going to do now? Right? And I think that the dialogue means listening to them, finding out what are the root causes that produces such a mindset. Right? Because once you can understand that, you will be able to understand, why people are flocking to them, right? And the important thing is then committing ourselves towards transforming things. We must diagnose the problem. Why is it that people flock to them? Because otherwise, we're always going to be sitting back and complaining and lamenting.
Totally
these guys are taking over the world, and they're just marginalizing us, and
we should
see
be
what they're doing.
To respond.
But find out why are they resonating with people? You know why? Maybe one of the reasons. Maybe they sound more authentic than what we do. We just are wishy-washing and treating the Bible with disrespect. And the Quran, whereas these people are showing
they sound like they have a moral ethic that is rooted in some kind of more profound.
So these are the reasons. And then the other thing is that there is indeed a spiritual crisis, produced by consumerism and by all of the things. And so once we begin to look at the roots of what produces this kind of extreme interpretations of the faith, we can then better be able to know what is the path towards peace. And they're always going to exist, right? But we can then somehow neutralize their impact by changing the hearts and minds
and by changing
people
and the culture, and beginning to address the culture that is giving rise to that kind of, because one of Jürgen Meyer's in his book Terror in the Mind of God, I know you followed his work. One of his interesting points, he was very clear, is that he covered all these different fundamentalists or kind of terrorist organizations in different religious traditions, and they all were very clear that their primary argument was with secular modernity, and that was the response was to that, not even to other traditions necessarily, but I can't help but feel if we could begin to change the culture at a fundamental way to address the kind of religious crisis, the spiritual crisis, to the ethical crisis of postmodernity. in such a way that religious soul started to come alive within the culture, not just within individuals, but within the culture.
Right.
That it would address in a much deeper way the issues of fundamentalism that people are addressing.
No, most certainly.